Rain pelted against the windscreen of Sarah Mitchell's well-maintained Volkswagen Golf as she navigated through London's bustling streets. The familiar ping of her rideshare app pierced through the steady drumming of raindrops, guiding her towards her next passenger. At 25, Sarah had mastered the art of remaining cheerful despite the long hours behind the wheel, knowing each fare brought her closer to covering her grandmother's mounting medical bills. The elegant townhouse where her next passenger awaited stood imposing against the grey London sky. A well-dressed businessman hurried down the steps, his Italian leather briefcase held above his head, in a futile attempt to shield himself from the downpour. Sarah noticed his stern expression in her rearview mirror as he settled into the back seat, immediately beginning a heated phone conversation. "Certainly, sir," she responded quietly when he barked out his destination, setting the navigation system for Canary Wharf. The businessman continued his call, his voice growing increasingly agitated as he discussed what seemed to be a crucial business deal. Sarah focused on the road, her silver ring catching the occasional glint of streetlights as she gripped the steering wheel. The ring had been her constant companion for as long as she could remember. Its intricate pattern of intertwined roses had always brought her comfort, especially during difficult moments. Today, she needed that comfort more than ever, with her grandmother's condition worsening and the mounting pressure of unpaid bills. As they approached their destination, the businessman ended his call. Sarah noticed him rummaging through his briefcase, his movements becoming increasingly frantic. The car had barely stopped when he suddenly spoke, his voice sharp with accusation. "My wallet, where is it? I had it when I got in." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "I'm sorry, sir. Your wallet? Don't play innocent. You must have taken it when I was on the phone. There was over $500 in cash inside." The accusation struck Sarah like a physical blow. "Sir, I would never—" "I've been driving the whole time. Perhaps you left it at home or your office." But the businessman had already stepped out of the car, his face contorted with anger. He was typing furiously on his phone, presumably reporting her to the rideshare company. Sarah sat frozen, her hands trembling on the steering wheel, knowing that her perfect 5-star rating and primary source of income were about to vanish. Within minutes, her phone buzzed with a notification. Her account had been suspended pending investigation. The screen blurred as tears welled in her eyes. She managed to drive a few blocks away, finally pulling over near St. James's Park, her sanctuary in the city. The rain had subsided to a gentle drizzle as Sarah found her favorite bench overlooking the lake. She buried her face in her hands, her grandmother's worried face swimming before her eyes. How would she manage now? The ring on her finger caught her attention again, and she twisted it absently, finding solace in its familiar texture. "Excuse me, miss. Are you all right?" The voice was gentle, cultured, carrying a note of genuine concern. Sarah looked up to find an elegantly dressed older gentleman standing nearby, his silver hair and distinguished features suggesting both wealth and kindness. But his expression had changed from concern to shock, his eyes fixed on her hand. "That ring. May I?" His voice trembled slightly as he gestured towards her hand. Confused but somehow reassured by his grandfatherly manner, Sarah extended her hand. The gentleman bent closer, his breath catching as he examined the intricate rose pattern. "Impossible," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "After all these years." Sarah watched as various emotions played across his face. Disbelief, hope, fear, and something deeper, a profound sadness that seemed to age him before her eyes. "Young lady, I'm Alexander Hamilton. Would you join me for a cup of tea? There's an excellent cafe just around the corner. I believe we have much to discuss." Sarah hesitated, her grandmother's warnings about strangers echoing in her mind. Yet, something in Alexander Hamilton's eyes, a mixture of pain and desperate hope, made her nod. As they walked towards the cafe, neither spoke, both lost in their thoughts. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change irrevocably, much like the day she had lost her parents so long ago. The silver ring glinted in the emerging sunlight, its roses holding secrets that were about to bloom after 25 years of silence. The cafe's warm interior provided a welcome respite from the autumn chill. Alexander Hamilton guided Sarah to a quiet corner table, ordering a pot of Earl Grey with trembling hands. His eyes kept darting to the ring on her finger, as if afraid it might vanish like a mirage. "That ring," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I designed it myself. 25 years ago, I had it made for my daughter Charlotte's first birthday. The roses, they were her mother's favorite flowers." Sarah's fingers instinctively moved to touch the ring. "I've had it since I can remember. My grandmother said it was with me when what?" Alexander leaned forward, his tea forgotten. "When I was found at Victoria Coach Station, I was just a baby." Sarah paused, studying Alexander's face. "Mr. Hamilton, why are you telling me about your daughter?" Alexander withdrew a leather wallet from his jacket, hands shaking as he removed a photograph. It showed a beautiful young woman holding a baby girl. The infant wore a tiny silver ring, clearly visible as she reached toward the camera. "This is the last picture taken of Charlotte and my granddaughter, Emily. They disappeared shortly after." His voice cracked. "The police investigation yielded nothing. My wife, Victoria, couldn't bear it. Our marriage didn't survive the loss." Sarah stared at the photograph, her heart pounding. The ring in the image was undeniably identical to hers, down to the smallest detail. Yet she forced herself to remain logical. "Mr. Hamilton, surely you don't think... this could be a coincidence. That ring might have been mass-produced." "No," Alexander said firmly. "It was a unique piece, crafted by a Jewish artisan in Hatton Garden. He promised never to replicate the design." He hesitated before continuing. "Sarah, would you allow me to hire a private investigator? I understand this must be overwhelming, but I've spent 25 years wondering what happened to my family." Sarah's mind whirled with possibilities. Her early childhood was a blur of foster homes before her grandmother, not her biological grandmother, she suddenly realized, had adopted her. Could this distinguished man really be connected to her past? "My grandmother. She's very ill," Sarah found herself saying. "I've just lost my job and her medical bills." "Please," Alexander interrupted gently. "Let me help. Regardless of what we discover, I can't ignore someone in need." He pulled out a business card, pushing it across the table. "Hamilton Industries. I've some resources at my disposal." Sarah traced the embossed lettering with her finger. Hamilton Industries was one of Britain's largest technology companies. She'd driven past their headquarters in Canary Wharf countless times, never imagining she might have a connection to its founder. "There's something else," Alexander added, his expression darkening. 20 years ago, I received an anonymous letter. It contained details about Charlotte's disappearance, things that were never made public. I didn't pursue it. The police had warned me about false leads, about people trying to exploit my grief. Now I wonder if that was my greatest mistake." Sarah sensed the weight of regret in his words. She thought about her grandmother, fighting for her life in hospital, about the years of wondering about her origins, and about the ring that had been her only link to her past. "All right," she agreed softly. "Where do we start?" Alexander's relief was palpable. He pulled out his phone, quickly dialing a number. "James, I need you to come to London immediately. Yes, it's urgent. I think we finally found her." As Alexander arranged for his investigator's arrival, Sarah watched raindrops race down the cafe window. The businessman's false accusation, which had seemed catastrophic an hour ago, now felt insignificant compared to the mystery unfolding before her. She wondered what her grandmother would say when she learned about this encounter. The ring felt heavier on her finger now, laden with possibilities and questions. Sarah had always believed it was simply a beautiful piece of jewelry, a random object that happened to be with her when she was abandoned. Now it seemed more like a key, unlocking doors to a past she never knew existed. Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across St. James's Park. Sarah couldn't help but wonder if somewhere in those shadows lurked the truth about her identity, waiting to be discovered after 25 years of silence. James Barrett arrived at Hamilton Industries' London headquarters the following morning, his weathered leather briefcase containing 25 years of case notes about Charlotte Hamilton's disappearance. The private investigator had never fully abandoned the case, even when all leads went cold. Now sitting across from Alexander in the penthouse office, he studied the photographs of Sarah's ring with professional scrutiny. "The craftsmanship matches perfectly," James confirmed, comparing the recent photos with those from his old case files. "But Alex, we need to proceed carefully. You remember what happened with the last potential lead? Alexander paced before the floor-to-ceiling windows, London's skyline stretching endlessly behind him. This is different, James. I saw the ring myself. Sarah's age matches, even her features. I understand, James interrupted gently, but we need concrete evidence. Have you told Victoria about this? Alexander's expression hardened at the mention of his ex-wife. Not yet. I want to be certain before involving her. He paused, considering his next words carefully. There was something else. The anonymous letter from 20 years ago. I kept it. James straightened in his chair. The one you never showed me. Alex, that could be crucial evidence. Alexander moved to his desk, unlocking a hidden drawer with trembling fingers. He withdrew a yellowed envelope, handling it as if it might crumble to dust. I couldn't bear to look at it again after receiving it. The details it contained, they were too painful. James accepted the envelope reverently, carefully extracting the letter inside. His eyes widened as he read, decades of investigation suddenly casting new shadows. This changes everything, he murmured. The writer knew about the birthmark on Charlotte's wrist. That was never made public. Keep reading, Alexander urged, his voice tight with emotion. James continued, his professional demeanor cracking slightly as he reached the end. They mentioned a specific location, a private adoption agency that closed down years ago. Alex, why didn't you share this before? Fear, Alexander admitted, sinking into his chair. The letter warned that if I involved the police, I'd never see my family again. By then, I'd already lost Victoria to grief and alcohol. I couldn't risk losing my last hope of finding Charlotte and Emily. A gentle knock interrupted their conversation. Sarah stood in the doorway, looking uncertain in the opulent surroundings. Alexander immediately moved to welcome her, but James noticed how his friend's hands trembled as he pulled out a chair for the young woman. Miss Mitchell, James began professionally, I've been investigating your case since last night. Could you tell me more about your early childhood? Anything you remember before your adoption? Sarah twisted her ring nervously. There's not much. My earliest clear memories are from the children's home. Before that, she frowned, concentrating. Sometimes I dream about a garden with roses. White roses. But I'm never sure if it's a real memory or something I invented. Alexander inhaled sharply. The rose garden at our country estate. Charlotte spent hours there with Emily. He turned to James. We need to visit the adoption agency mentioned in the letter. It's not that simple, James cautioned. The building was destroyed in a fire shortly after the agency closed. But, he added, seeing Alexander's face fall, I may know someone who worked there. She's retired now, living in Cornwall. Sarah leaned forward, her voice steady despite her obvious emotion. Mr. Barrett, there's something else you should know. Last night I spoke with my grandmother about all this. She told me something strange. When she adopted me, she was warned never to investigate my background. She assumed it was standard procedure, but now... James exchanged glances with Alexander. Someone wanted to ensure you disappeared completely, he mused. The question is why, and more importantly, who had the power to orchestrate such an elaborate plan? Alexander moved to the window, his reflection ghostly against the glass. Victoria, he said quietly. She was different after Charlotte disappeared. She started drinking heavily, became paranoid. When I received that letter, he turned back to face them. She insisted I ignore it, said it would only bring more pain. Mr. Hamilton, Sarah interjected softly, if your ex-wife is involved, wouldn't she recognize me? My photo was in the papers last year when I won a community service award for my work with homeless youth. James pulled out his tablet, quickly finding the article. She left the country shortly after your story was published, he noted, scanning through travel records. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? The revelation hung heavy in the air. Alexander gripped the back of his chair, his knuckles white. James, I need you to find Victoria. And Sarah... He hesitated, looking at the young woman who might be his granddaughter. Would you consider staying at my estate for a while? It would be safer, and your grandmother would have access to the best medical care. Sarah touched her ring again, a gesture Alexander now recognized as a self-soothing habit. I'll need to discuss it with her, but... Yes, I think that would be wise. As they made arrangements, none of them noticed the sleek black car parked across the street, its tinted windows concealing a figure who watched the Hamilton Industries building with intense interest. The observer lifted a phone to their ear, speaking in hushed tones. "They're looking into the adoption agency. No, I don't think they know everything yet. But we need to move quickly." The Hamilton estate sprawled across 30 acres of manicured grounds, its Georgian architecture a testament to old money and careful preservation. Sarah stood in what remained of the rose garden, now wild and overgrown, yet still hauntingly familiar. Her grandmother, Margaret, watched from her wheelchair on the nearby patio, wrapped in blankets despite the mild autumn afternoon. "The dreams make sense now," Sarah murmured, touching a weathered trellis. White roses still climbed the ancient wood, their late blooms defying the season. "I remember this place, Gran. Not clearly, but there's something—" Margaret wheeled herself closer, her illness temporarily forgotten in the face of their unfolding drama. "I always knew this day might come, love. When they brought you to me, such a tiny thing with that beautiful ring, I felt you were meant for greater things than our little flat in Brixton." Sarah knelt beside her grandmother's wheelchair. "You gave me everything, Gran. No matter what we discover, that won't change." Inside the mansion, Alexander and James pored over old photographs spread across a massive oak table. The private investigator had arranged them chronologically, creating a timeline of the months leading up to Charlotte's disappearance. "Look at this," James said, pointing to a photo of a corporate gala. 3 weeks before Charlotte vanished. "See who's standing with Victoria?" Alexander leaned closer, his breath catching. "Richard Blackwood, my former business partner." His voice hardened. "The one who nearly bankrupted the company with his embezzlement scheme." "Exactly. And according to my sources, he's been living quite comfortably in Switzerland since then, despite losing everything in the scandal." James pulled out a bank statement. "Someone's been making regular payments to an account in his name. Substantial payments." Alexander sank into a chair, the implications overwhelming. "Are you suggesting Victoria and Richard, that they planned this together?" "It's a theory worth investigating. Victoria stood to inherit everything if something happened to Charlotte and Emily. With them gone, and you consumed by grief, she could take control of the company," Alexander finished, his face ashen, "which is exactly what she attempted to do before I discovered her addiction." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Roberts, the family physician Alexander had called to examine Margaret. The doctor's expression was grave as he joined them. "Mr. Hamilton, you should know. Someone accessed Mrs. Mitchell's medical records at her previous hospital last night. When the staff investigated this morning, they found several files had been altered or deleted." James was immediately alert. "Which files?" "The ones from 25 years ago when Sarah was first brought in as an abandoned infant." Alexander stood abruptly. "We need to move quickly. James, contact your source in Cornwall. I want to know everything about that adoption agency. And double the security here. No one enters or leaves without my explicit permission." Outside, Sarah had wandered deeper into the rose garden, drawn by an inexplicable sense of familiarity. A half-collapsed arbor caught her attention, its wooden beams weathered but still standing. As she drew closer, something glinted in the undergrowth. Kneeling, she brushed aside years of dead leaves, revealing a tarnished locket half buried in the soil. Her hands trembled as she prized it open. Inside, a small photograph showed a young woman, Charlotte Hamilton, holding a baby. On the opposite side, an inscription, "To my darling Emily, always keep love in your heart." Sarah ran toward the house, the locket clutched tightly in her hand. She found Alexander in his study, still deep in discussion with James. "I found this," she said breathlessly, holding out the locket. "It was in the garden under the old arbor." Alexander took the locket, his eyes filling with tears as he read the inscription. "I gave this to Charlotte on Emily's christening day. She was wearing it when—" He couldn't finish the sentence. James examined the locket carefully. "The clasp is broken, but there's no rust around the break. This wasn't here for 25 years, it was placed recently." "A warning," Alexander suggested, his protective instincts flaring. "Or a message," James countered. "Someone wants us to keep looking. Someone who's been carrying this locket for 25 years, waiting for the right moment." Sarah touched her ring unconsciously. "Charlotte? Could she still be—" "No," Alexander said firmly. "The evidence was clear about Charlotte." "But Emily—" He looked at Sarah with newfound determination. "We're getting closer to the truth, and someone out there is trying to help us find it. As if in response to his words, Alexander's phone chimed with a message. His face darkened as he read it. Victoria's assistant just called. She's flying back to London tomorrow. He looked up at James and Sarah. She says she has something to confess. Victoria Hamilton's arrival at the estate created a ripple of tension that spread through the mansion like a cold draft. She stepped out of her Bentley with the same grace that had once made her the toast of London society, though years of guilt had etched deep lines around her eyes. Alexander waited in his study, Sarah and James flanking him like guards. "So you've redecorated," Victoria observed as she entered, her voice carrying a slight tremor beneath its cultured tones. Her eyes fixed on Sarah, widening slightly before she caught herself. "So it's true then? You found her?" "No thanks to you," Alexander replied coldly. "Sit down, Victoria. You said you had something to confess." Victoria sank into a leather armchair, her perfectly manicured hands clasping and unclasping in her lap. "Before I begin, you should know, Richard Blackwood was found unresponsive in his Geneva apartment this morning." James leaned forward. "How convenient." "I had nothing to do with that," Victoria snapped, then seemed to deflate. "Though I suspect I know who did. Richard always was a liability, especially after he started drinking." "Start from the beginning," Alexander demanded. "The truth, Victoria." "All of it." Victoria's gaze drifted to the window, toward the overgrown rose garden beyond. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Richard and we had a plan. A simple plan. Take Emily for a few days, force you to sign over control of the company. But Charlotte wasn't supposed to be there that night." Sarah's hand found her ring, twisting it anxiously. Victoria noticed the gesture, her composure cracking further. "That ring," she whispered. "I told Richard to get rid of it. He swore he had." "What happened to Charlotte?" Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet. Victoria's carefully maintained facade crumbled. She recognized Richard despite his disguise. There was a struggle. "Charlotte." She struck her head when she fell. Richard panicked. He grabbed Emily and ran. "I found them later at the safe house." "You found your daughter unconscious, and you just left her there." Alexander's hands gripped his chair arms, knuckles white. "She was already gone, Alexander. What could I do?" Victoria's voice rose hysterically. "Richard said he'd tell everyone I planned it if I didn't help him. He took Emily away that night, said he knew someone who could give her a new life, make sure she'd never be found." Sarah stood abruptly, her voice shaking. "You let them take a baby away from her family because you were afraid of a scandal?" Victoria turned to her, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand. I was pregnant with Richard's child. If Alexander had discovered our affair, I would have lost everything. The company, my reputation, my lifestyle." "Your humanity," Alexander cut in, his voice thick with disgust. "Where did Richard take her?" "To a woman named Helena Blackwood, his sister. She ran the adoption agency. She arranged everything, created new papers for Emily." Victoria reached into her handbag with trembling hands, withdrawing a worn envelope. "I kept track of you, though. Every year on your birthday. I knew you were safe, loved." James took the envelope, examining the photographs inside. They chronicled Sarah's life from afar. School plays, sports days, graduation. "You've been watching her all this time?" "Protecting her," Victoria corrected. "There are others involved, powerful people. Richard had connections in places I dare not mention. When I saw Sarah's photo in the paper last year, I knew it was only a matter of time before someone recognized her." Alexander stood, towering over his ex-wife. "Who else was involved, Victoria? What aren't you telling us?" Before she could answer, James's phone buzzed. His face darkened as he read the message. "Richard Blackwood's sister, Helena. She's requesting an urgent meeting. Says she has documents we need to see, but she'll only speak with Sarah." Victoria's face went pale. "You can't trust her. Helena's more dangerous than Richard ever was. She knows everything about everyone. It's how she's stayed safe all these years." Sarah squared her shoulders. "I want to meet her. I need to know the truth about who I am, about what really happened that night." "No," both Alexander and Victoria said simultaneously. "I'm not asking for permission," Sarah replied firmly. "For 25 years, everyone else has made decisions about my life. It's my turn now." Alexander studied her face, seeing Charlotte's determination in her expression. "Then we do this carefully. James, arrange the meeting, but on our terms. And Victoria, He turned to his ex-wife. "You're not leaving until we have the whole truth. Every detail, every person involved." Victoria nodded slowly, reaching for her phone. "There's someone else you should talk to first. My former chauffeur, Thomas Wells. He drove Richard that night. He's been working as a groundskeeper in Yorkshire, living under an assumed name." As James made arrangements for both meetings, Sarah walked to the window. The rose garden lay in deepening shadows, its secrets slowly unraveling like thorny vines. Somewhere in that web of lies and half-truths lay the key to her past, and perhaps her future. "I remember more than I let on," she said quietly, causing the others to fall silent. "Not just the garden. I remember someone singing to me the scent of roses and—" She turned to Victoria. "I remember you standing in a doorway watching me sleep. Why didn't you ever try to bring me home?" The Yorkshire countryside rolled past the car windows, its autumn colours muted under heavy grey skies. James drove with Sarah beside him and Alexander in the back, all lost in their own thoughts. Victoria had been left at the estate under careful watch, her presence both a guarantee of cooperation and a precaution against warning others. Thomas Wells's cottage sat at the end of a long gravel drive, surrounded by carefully tended gardens. As they pulled up, an elderly man straightened from his work among the flower beds, his weathered face registering first recognition, then resignation. "I wondered when you'd come," he said simply, leading them inside. The cottage interior was sparse but immaculate, with the discipline of a military man evident in its organization. Miss Victoria called to warn me, said it was time to unburden my conscience. Alexander studied the man who had once been their trusted family chauffeur. "Why did you help them, Thomas? You were with us for 15 years. Thomas gestured for them to sit at his small kitchen table, putting a kettle on with hands that trembled slightly. "Sometimes loyalty leads us down dark paths, Mr. Hamilton. Miss Victoria, she knew about my son, about the trouble he was in. She blackmailed you," James concluded. "She offered help," Thomas corrected. "My boy was in deep with some dangerous people. Miss Victoria made his problems disappear in exchange." He sighed heavily. "I drove Mr. Blackwood that night, helped him get little Emily to his sister's agency. But I swear I didn't know about Miss Charlotte until it was too late." Sarah leaned forward. "What do you remember about that night?" Thomas's eyes grew distant. "Rain. It was raining so hard you could barely see. Mr. Blackwood was agitated, kept looking at his watch. Miss Charlotte wasn't supposed to be home. She had a charity event that evening, but she'd cancelled last minute because Emily had a fever." "Go on," Alexander urged, his voice tight. "There was a struggle. I heard it from outside. When Mr. Blackwood came out with Emily, he was wearing different clothes, said there'd been an accident, that we needed to move quickly. We drove to the agency first. Helena was waiting. She took Emily, said she'd handle everything. Then we went to a private airfield. A plane was waiting to take Mr. Blackwood to Switzerland." James made notes as Thomas spoke. "And the adoption agency. What happened there?" "Helena had it all arranged. She had papers ready. Birth certificates, adoption records, everything needed to give Emily a new identity. But she was nervous, kept saying something about loose ends and insurance policies." Thomas paused. "A week later, she called me, asked me to deliver a package to a safety deposit box, said it was protection in case anything went wrong." Alexander straightened. "Do you remember where this box is?" "Citibank, Canary Wharf branch." "Box 2547. Thomas stood, moving to an old writing desk in the corner. "I kept the key all these years. Couldn't bring myself to get rid of it, but couldn't bear to look inside either." He withdrew a small key from a hidden compartment. "Maybe now it can help make things right." Sarah accepted the key with trembling fingers. "What's in the box?" "I never looked. But Helena, she was thorough, kept records of everything, insurance against anyone who might threaten her position. The kind of records powerful people would prefer stayed buried." James's phone buzzed, a message from his contact at Helena's current residence. "She's agreed to meet tomorrow morning. Says she's been expecting us." Thomas touched Sarah's arm gently. "Be careful with Helena. She's built her life on other people's secrets, makes her more dangerous than anyone else in this story." As they prepared to leave, Thomas called Alexander back. "There's something else." "The night it happened, after I dropped Mr. Blackwood at the airfield, I went back to check on Miss Charlotte. I couldn't just leave her there, not after all the years I'd watched her grow up. But when I got to the house, there were already people there. Important people. They saw me, but they let me go. Said it would be better for everyone if I forgot what I'd seen. Who were they? Alexander demanded. Thomas shook his head. I signed papers, took an oath, but Helena knows. She knows everything. It's why they've never touched her, why she's lived freely all these years while Mr. Blackwood had to hide abroad. On the drive back to London, Sarah clutched the safety deposit box key, her ring catching the last rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds. Tomorrow they would meet Helena, the woman who had orchestrated her disappearance. Tomorrow they would open the box that held a quarter century of secrets. We should check the contents of the box before meeting Helena, James suggested. Whatever's inside might give us leverage. Alexander nodded, watching Sarah in the rear-view mirror. She sat quietly, lost in thought, her free hand absently touching the locket they'd found in the rose garden. In her features, he could see Charlotte's strength, the same determination to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Helena won't expect us to have the key, Sarah said finally. She thinks she still controls all the pieces of this puzzle. Tomorrow we change that. The private banking suite at Citibank's Canary Wharf branch hummed with quiet efficiency. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she inserted the key into safety deposit box 2547, Alexander and James watching intently. The lock turned with a soft click, releasing 25 years of secrets. Inside lay several manila envelopes, their edges yellowed with age, and a small USB drive that seemed oddly modern among the paper documents. James carefully spread the contents across the polished table while Alexander stood guard at the door. These are adoption records, James murmured, examining the first set of papers. Dozens of them spanning nearly 3 decades. Helena wasn't just handling illegal adoptions, she was trafficking children from wealthy families. Sarah rifled through another stack of documents, her face paling. There are photographs here. Surveillance photos of all the families involved, including... She held up a picture of a younger Victoria meeting with Helena in what appeared to be a private club. Alexander joined them at the table, picking up a thick folder marked Insurance. Inside were bank statements, offshore account details, and correspondence that linked some of Britain's most prominent figures to Helena's operation. This is why she's been untouchable, he breathed. She wasn't just arranging adoptions, she was collecting leverage over everyone involved. James inserted the USB drive into his laptop, his expression growing grave as he scrolled through its contents. It's all here. Every transaction, every placement, every payoff. Helena digitized her entire operation. He paused, clicking through several files. Wait, there's something else, a video file from the night Charlotte disappeared. Sarah gripped the edge of the table. Play it. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to show the Hamilton Estates driveway. A car arrived, Thomas's car, and Richard Blackwood emerged, carrying a bundled infant. But it was the second vehicle that caught their attention. A sleek government car with diplomatic plates. Freeze that, Alexander commanded. James complied, zooming in on a figure emerging from the diplomatic vehicle. That's Sir Geoffrey Blackwood, Richard's cousin. He was junior minister for foreign affairs at the time. There's more, James said, continuing the video. 2 other men in suits exited the vehicle, efficiently cleaning up any evidence of what had transpired. This wasn't just about your company, Alexander. This was a coordinated operation with government involvement. Sarah had gone very still, staring at a document she'd just uncovered. I think I know why. She laid the paper on the table, a birth certificate. Emily Hamilton's original birth certificate, with a note attached in Helena's precise handwriting, genetic match confirmed, bloodline secure. What does that mean? Alexander asked, his voice barely a whisper. James was already searching through the digital files. Here, Helena kept detailed notes. According to this, Emily's DNA was of particular interest to certain government agencies. Something about genetic markers that could... He trailed off, his eyes widening. This goes deeper than we imagined. They weren't just taking children. They were selecting them based on specific genetic traits. But why? Sarah's hand went to her ring, a gesture that now seemed loaded with new meaning. Alexander's face had drained of color. Charlotte's mother, my first wife, she was involved in classified research before her accident. Genetic engineering, though she never told me the details. She always said our work would help protect future generations. And Emily inherited whatever makes that research valuable, James concluded. Which means Sarah. A soft sound at the door made them all turn. A bank employee stood there, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry, but there's someone here asking for Miss Mitchell. Says it's urgent. A Miss Helena Blackwood." Sarah exchanged glances with Alexander and James. "She knows we're here. She must have been monitoring the box." "Good," Alexander said grimly, gathering the documents. "Let's go find out exactly what she knows about this government project and why my granddaughter was so important to it." James quickly copied the USB's contents to his secured cloud storage, while Sarah photographed key documents with her phone. They couldn't risk losing this evidence. As they prepared to meet Helena, Sarah paused, looking at her reflection in the polished wall of the banking suite. The face that looked back at her was no longer just Sarah Mitchell, the Uber driver struggling to support her grandmother. She was Emily Hamilton, part of a mystery that stretched back decades and reached into the highest levels of power. "Whatever happens next," she said quietly, "we need to make sure these records become public. Not just for me, but for all the other families they destroyed." Alexander squeezed her shoulder gently. "Helena won't expect us to have uncovered this much. For the first time in 25 years, we have the advantage." They stepped into the bank's elegant reception area where Helena Blackwood waited, elegant and poised in an expensive suit. Her smile held no warmth as she regarded them, only calculation. "Well," she said smoothly, "shall we discuss terms? I believe we all have something to lose if this situation isn't handled discreetly." Helena Blackwood's private office in Mayfair spoke of old money and careful cultivation of power. Oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, watching as Sarah, Alexander, and James took their seats across from their hostess. "I must admit," Helena began, pouring tea with practiced grace, "you've played this rather well. Though I assume the contents of that safety deposit box make my position clear. Mutually assured destruction is such an effective deterrent, don't you agree?" "We're not here to negotiate," Alexander cut in. "We want the truth about what happened to Charlotte and why Emily was taken." Helena's smile remained fixed. "Truth is such a complex thing, Mr. Hamilton. Your wife approached us initially, yes, but the operation was already in motion. Emily had been identified as a person of interest long before that night." "Because of my first wife's research," Alexander stated. "What exactly was Catherine working on?" "Ah, Catherine." Helena set down her teacup with a delicate clink. "Brilliant woman. She understood that humanity's future would depend on certain genetic advantages. Her work identified markers that could revolutionize human capability. When she realized the implications, she tried to destroy her research. Her car accident was most unfortunate." Sarah leaned forward. "It wasn't an accident, was it? What matters," Helena continued smoothly, "is that Emily inherited those genetic markers. The potential in her DNA could advance medical science by decades. The program needed her and others like her." "Program?" James interrupted. "What program?" Helena's eyes glittered. "Now that's the real question, isn't it? Sir Geoffrey understood the importance of securing Britain's future. These children weren't stolen, Mr. Hamilton. They were selected, protected, guided into positions where their unique abilities could be properly developed." "You experimented on children," Alexander's voice shook with rage. "We gave them opportunities," Helena corrected. "Look at Sarah. Her natural intelligence, her resilience, her intuitive understanding of people, all enhanced by careful nurturing of her genetic potential. The program has produced doctors, scientists, military strategists, all contributing to our nation's advancement." Sarah stood abruptly. "We were babies. You took us from our families and gave you new ones," Helena replied calmly. "The ring you wear, it contains a microchip, a tracking device, yes, but also a monitoring system. We've watched your development since infancy. Every achievement, every aptitude test, every medical examination, all confirming Catherine's theories." James was already typing on his laptop. "The other children in the program, where are they?" "Safe, protected, though I suspect that's about to change." Helena sighed. "The files you took from the safety deposit box, they'll expose everything. Decades of work, countless careers, Britain's entire genetic research program, all vulnerable because Victoria couldn't handle her guilt. You're going to help us expose it," Alexander declared. every detail, every name, every child affected. Helena's laugh was bitter. You really don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? Sir Geoffrey and his colleagues won't allow that. Even now they're likely moving to contain this situation. As if on cue, James's phone buzzed. His face darkened as he read the message. The bank's security footage from earlier has been wiped, and Victoria, she's gone from the estate. The security team was ordered to stand down by someone claiming government authority. Sarah touched her ring, a new understanding dawning. You knew we'd find the safety deposit box. This whole meeting, you're stalling us. Helena's smile widened fractionally. Very good. You see, your intuitive abilities are remarkable. Catherine would have been proud. Alexander stood, pulling Sarah toward the door. James, call your contact at the Guardian. Send them everything we found. Now. That would be unwise, Helena called after them. Think of Margaret, Sarah's grandmother. Her current medical care is quite expensive. It would be a shame if her funding were suddenly withdrawn. Sarah whirled back. You wouldn't dare. My dear, I've spent decades protecting this program. Do you really think I'd hesitate now? Helena's voice hardened. The evidence you've gathered will be dismissed as conspiracy theories. The witnesses will become unreliable. The digital files will be corrupted. Ask yourself, is it worth the risk? But Sarah was no longer listening. She had pulled out her phone, scrolling through the photos she'd taken of the documents. You made one mistake, she said quietly. You kept records of everything, including the other children in the program, their adoptive families, their current locations. She looked up, meeting Helena's gaze. If anything happens to my grandmother, if anyone I care about is threatened, those records go public, all of them. Helena's composure cracked slightly. You're bluffing. Am I? You said it yourself. I have remarkable intuitive abilities. And right now, my intuition says you're terrified of those children finding out the truth about their origins. Imagine the chaos when they all start asking questions. The two women stared at each other, decades of secrets hanging in the balance. Finally, Helena nodded slowly. Perhaps we can reach an arrangement, one that protects everyone's interests. No more arrangements, Alexander interrupted. No more secrets. It's time for the truth to come out, all of it. As they left Helena's office, Sarah noticed her hands were steady, the ring on her finger catching the late afternoon sun. They had grabbed onto the edge of a much larger mystery, one that went beyond her own identity. Somewhere out there were other children like her, carrying genetic secrets they didn't understand. What now? She asked quietly, as they stepped into the street. Alexander squeezed her hand. Now we find them. All of them. And we bring them home. The Hamilton estate buzzed with activity as journalists gathered outside the gates, drawn by the explosive revelations that had begun appearing in The Guardian. James had orchestrated a careful release of information, ensuring that multiple news outlets received copies of the evidence simultaneously. It was their insurance policy. The story had grown too big to be buried. Inside, Sarah sat with Margaret in the library, holding her grandmother's frail hand as they watched the news coverage unfold on television. The headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen read, Government Genetic Program Exposed. Decades of Secret Adoptions Revealed. I always knew you were special, Margaret said softly, squeezing Sarah's hand. From the moment they brought you to me. But this, she gestured at the television, where experts were discussing the implications of Catherine Hamilton's genetic research. I'm still me, Gran, Sarah assured her. Nothing changes that. You're my family, no matter what my DNA says. Alexander entered the library, his face showing the strain of endless interviews and meetings. The Prime Minister has just announced a formal inquiry. Sir Geoffrey has been suspended pending investigation, and several other officials have resigned. Any word from Victoria? Sarah asked. She's agreed to testify about everything. Her solicitor contacted me an hour ago. Alexander sank into an armchair. She's in a secure location under protection. Apparently, she's not the only one coming forward. Other families involved in the program are beginning to speak out. James burst into the room, laptop in hand. You need to see this. Helena's records included an encrypted database of all the children in the program. We've managed to decrypt it. He set the computer down, bringing up a spreadsheet. 27 children, all with specific genetic markers. Look at their current professions. Sarah leaned forward, scanning the list. Doctors, scientists, military strategists. Just like Helena said, but there's something else. These achievements, these careers, they're not just the result of genetic engineering. We worked for them. We earned them. Of course you did, Margaret interjected firmly. They may have chosen you for your genetics, but your choices were your own. Your kindness, your determination, those come from your heart, not your DNA. Alexander studied the list thoughtfully. Some of these names, I recognize them from news articles, breakthrough medical research, technological innovations. They've all been contributing to society in remarkable ways, but not because they were programmed to. They chose to help others. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Thompson, the butler, looking uncommonly flustered. "Sir, there's someone at the gate. A young woman. She says she has the same ring as Miss Sarah." The room fell silent. Sarah touched her ring unconsciously, feeling the slight bump where the microchip was embedded. Another child from the program reaching out. Let her in, Sarah decided, and contact the others on the list. They deserve to know the truth about their origins, to make their own choices about coming forward. As they waited for their visitor, Sarah moved to the window, watching the growing media presence outside. The story had captured the public's imagination, not just the government conspiracy and scientific implications, but the human element. Families torn apart, children raised in secrecy, all in the name of progress. "I've been thinking about what Helena said," she mused, "about Catherine's research being meant to protect future generations. Maybe she was right about the potential, but wrong about the method. These abilities, these genetic advantages, they're meant to be given freely, not controlled and manipulated." Alexander joined her at the window. "Catherine would have agreed with you. That's why she tried to destroy her research when she realized how it might be misused. She believed in human potential, but also in human choice." The sound of car tires on gravel drew their attention. A taxi had pulled up to the main entrance, and a young woman stepped out. She was about Sarah's age, with a confident bearing that spoke of military training. As she approached the house, she raised her right hand in greeting, and there, catching the sunlight, was a silver ring identical to Sarah's. "Dr. Emma Lawrence," James read from the database, "military medical researcher. Her genetic markers show an enhanced capacity for strategic thinking and rapid problem-solving." "She's also a person," Sarah corrected gently, moving toward the door. "One who, like me, has just discovered her entire life is part of something bigger than she imagined." As Sarah went to meet their visitor, Alexander watched his granddaughter with pride. In her bearing, he saw echoes of both Charlotte's compassion and Catherine's determination to use knowledge for good. The genetic program had tried to create perfect specimens, but instead had produced something far more valuable: individuals who chose to use their gifts to help others. "The press will want to talk to all of them," James noted. "The children from the program, they'll want to understand how this affected their lives. Then we'll let them tell their own stories," Sarah called back over her shoulder. "No more secrets, no more control, just truth and the freedom to choose what to do with it." She opened the front door, extending her hand to Emma Lawrence. Two identical rings glinted in the afternoon sun, no longer tracking devices for a secret program, but symbols of a shared history about to be reclaimed. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of revelations and reunions. The Hamilton estate had become an unofficial gathering place for the children of the program, each wearing a silver ring that now represented not control, but connection. Sarah had met 12 of them so far, each story unique yet bound by common threads of excellence and an innate desire to contribute to society. Emma Lawrence had become a close ally, her military background proving invaluable as they navigated the media storm and government investigations. Together, they had established a support network for the others, ensuring that each person could process their discoveries in their own way and at their own pace. On a crisp autumn morning, Sarah stood in the restored rose garden, watching as Margaret chatted with some of the others who had chosen to come forward. Her grandmother's health had improved significantly since moving to the estate, her strength bolstered by the excitement of helping these remarkable individuals piece together their histories. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Alexander's voice interrupted her reverie. Sarah smiled, turning to face her grandfather. "I was just thinking about Helena's last words to us. She said we were selected, protected, guided. She really believed she was doing the right thing. "The road to perdition is paved with good intentions," Alexander quoted softly. Catherine understood that. It's why she tried to stop her research from being weaponized. "I've been reading her journals," Sarah admitted. "The ones they found in Sir Geoffrey's private vault. She wasn't just brilliant, she was visionary, but she saw something they didn't." "What's that?" "That genetic potential is just the beginning. It's our choices, our experiences, our connections with others that shape who we become." Sarah gestured toward the gathering on the lawn. "Look at us. Every person here has achieved remarkable things, but not because we were programmed to. We did it because we wanted to make a difference." James approached, tablet in hand. "The parliamentary inquiry is scheduled for next week. They want to hear testimony from any program participants willing to speak." He hesitated. "Victoria's solicitor called. She's willing to provide complete details about the agency's operations, including the offshore accounts used to fund the program." "And Helena?" Alexander asked. "Under house arrest. Her records have opened investigations in 3 countries. The genetic research is being reviewed by an international ethics committee." James smiled slightly. "They're particularly interested in talking to the successful outcomes of the program, not as test subjects, but as experts in their own right." Sarah touched her ring thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that. Catherine's research, the original intention was to help humanity evolve, to better face future challenges. Maybe that's still possible, but through cooperation and choice, rather than control and secrecy." A burst of laughter from the lawn drew their attention. Emma was demonstrating something to a group that included a neurosurgeon, an environmental scientist, and a quantum computing expert, all children of the program, all wearing silver rings. "They're already talking about establishing a research foundation," Alexander noted, "using their combined expertise to tackle global challenges." Catherine would have loved that. Sarah nodded. "A legacy of collaboration instead of control. But first, we need to make sure every person affected by the program has the chance to learn the truth and make their own choices." "Speaking of choices," James interjected, "The Guardian wants to do a feature story. They're interested in how you've all chosen to move forward, how you're transforming a story of separation into one of connection." Sarah watched as Margaret wheeled herself over to greet another newly arrived program participant. Her grandmother's face glowed with pride and purpose, her illness seemingly forgotten as she helped another family begin their journey of reconciliation. "Tell them yes," Sarah decided. "The world needs to understand that this isn't just a story about genetic engineering or government secrets. It's about human resilience, about the families we're born into and the ones we choose. It's about taking something meant to divide and control us and turning it into a force for unity and positive change." As the autumn sun began to set, casting long shadows across the rose garden, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. The ring on her finger no longer represented a mystery to be solved, but a bridge to a new future, one built on truth, choice, and the unshakable bonds of both blood and chosen family. Alexander squeezed her shoulder gently. "Your mother would be proud of you, you know. Not because of your genetics or your achievements, but because of your heart." Sarah leaned into his embrace, watching as more cars arrived at the estate, bringing more rings, more stories, more possibilities. The program had tried to create perfect specimens, but instead had created something far more powerful, a community of individuals determined to use their gifts not for power, but for progress. The Rose Garden, once a place of lost memories and hidden secrets, now bloomed with new purpose. Each flower represented a story reclaimed, a family reunited, a truth unveiled. And in the center of it all, a silver ring caught the last rays of sunlight. No longer a symbol of control, but a beacon of hope for the future. 1 year had passed since the exposure of the genetic program, and the Hamilton estate had transformed from a place of hidden sorrows to a beacon of hope. The Rose Garden, now fully restored, hosted regular gatherings of program participants and their families. Today was particularly special, the official launch of the Hamilton-Catherine Foundation for Ethical Genetic Research. Sarah stood at a podium before a gathered crowd of journalists, scientists, and fellow program participants. The silver ring on her finger caught the spring sunlight as she addressed the audience. "A year ago, we discovered that we were part of something larger than ourselves. not just a government program, but a testament to human potential and resilience. Today, we take the next step in transforming that legacy. In the front row, Margaret beamed with pride, her health much improved thanks to innovative treatments developed by program participants who had chosen careers in medicine. Beside her sat Alexander, who had thrown himself into supporting the Foundation's mission of ethical scientific advancement. The Hamilton Catherine Foundation represents everything my grandmother Catherine hoped to achieve, Sarah continued. We're funding research that respects human dignity and choice, that seeks to enhance life without controlling it. But more importantly, we're creating a community where genetic gifts are shared freely, not hoarded or manipulated. Emma Lawrence, now the Foundation's security director, stood at attention near the stage. Her military bearing remained, but her expression had softened over the past year as she helped other program participants reconnect with their biological families. Victoria sat quietly at the back of the audience. After her testimony had helped secure convictions against Sir Geoffrey and his conspirators, she had dedicated herself to helping locate and support other families affected by the program. Her relationship with Sarah remained complex but healing, built on truth rather than secrets. Some of you have asked why we chose to keep the rings. Sarah held up her hand, the silver band glinting. These were meant to track and control us. But we've transformed them into symbols of connection and choice. Each ring now contains new technology, not for surveillance, but for communication, a network linking brilliant minds who choose to work together for the greater good. James, recording the ceremony for the Foundation's archives, smiled as he panned across the audience. Many of them wore identical silver rings, but now they represented belonging rather than bondage. His investigation had helped uncover all 27 program participants, each of whom had been given the choice to join the Foundation's mission. The parliamentary inquiry revealed dark truths about power and control, Sarah acknowledged, but it also showed us something beautiful, how humanity's greatest achievements come not from coercion, but from collaboration. Every person here today chose to be part of this new chapter, not because their genetics compelled them, but because their hearts called them to serve. Alexander watched his granddaughter with tears in his eyes. In her passion for ethical progress, he saw echoes of Catherine's brilliance and Charlotte's compassion. The Foundation would be their legacy, not just to science but to human dignity. The rose garden behind the podium burst with spring blooms, each flower a testament to careful tending and patient growth. Like the participants of the program, they had flourished not through control, but through nurturing and freedom to grow naturally. Today, we announce our first major initiative, Sarah revealed. The Catherine Scholarship Program will support gifted students who demonstrate not just academic excellence, but ethical leadership. We believe that brilliance without compassion is dangerous, just as power without responsibility is corrupt. She paused, touching the locket she still wore, the one found in the garden that had helped unravel the mystery of her identity. But perhaps our most important work isn't in labs or research facilities. It's in helping others reclaim their stories, reconnect with their families, and choose their own paths forward. The audience applauded as Sarah introduced the Foundation's board members, a diverse group of program participants who had chosen to use their gifts for the greater good. Among them were medical researchers, environmental scientists, and technology innovators, all working together to address global challenges. As the formal ceremony concluded, Sarah found a quiet moment in the rose garden. She touched a white bloom, remembering the dreams that had haunted her before she knew their significance. Now the garden represented not loss, but renewal. Not secrets, but open sharing of knowledge and hope. You've created something remarkable, Alexander said, joining her among the roses. Catherine would have loved this. Using genetic gifts to unite rather than divide, to heal rather than control. Sarah smiled, watching as program participants and their families mingled on the lawn, sharing stories and dreams for the future. We all created this, together. That's the real legacy. Not the genetics, but the choices we make with our gifts. The Foundation would face challenges ahead, she knew. The ethical questions surrounding genetic research wouldn't be easily resolved. But they would face them together, guided by compassion and human dignity, rather than control and secrecy. The autumn evening wrapped the Hamilton estate in golden light as Sarah prepared for a very special dinner. The past 18 months had transformed not just her life, but the lives of countless others touched by the program's revelation. Tonight would bring together the extended family she had gained, both biological and chosen. Margaret, now strong enough to walk short distances, arranged flowers in the dining room. White roses, of course. Their significance had only grown stronger with time. The long table was set for 20, accommodating program participants who had become as close as siblings, along with their families. "Everything ready, love?" Margaret asked as Sarah entered with the final place settings. "Almost." Sarah adjusted a name card, smiling at how natural it felt now to host these gatherings. Victoria's arriving early to help with the final preparations. The relationship with her biological grandmother had evolved slowly, built on honest conversations and shared commitment to helping others affected by the program. Victoria had found purpose in mentoring young scientists, ensuring they understood the ethical implications of their research. A familiar car crunched on the gravel driveway, James arriving with Emma and several other program participants. They had just returned from Geneva, where the World Health Organization had formally endorsed the Hamilton-Catherine Foundation's ethical guidelines for genetic research. "The International Committee was impressed," Emma reported, as she helped carry dishes to the kitchen, "especially with how we've implemented the voluntary sharing program. Governments are starting to understand that cooperation yields better results than control." Sarah nodded, remembering how that lesson had been hard-won. The Foundation's success had come not from enforcing participation, but from creating an environment where gifted individuals could choose to collaborate freely. The doorbell chimed again. This time it was Alexander, returning from a meeting with Parliament's Science and Ethics Committee. His silver hair caught the evening light as he embraced his granddaughter. "They've officially adopted our recommendations," he announced. "All future genetic research will require ethical oversight and participant consent. Catherine's dream of responsible scientific advancement is becoming reality." As more guests arrived, the house filled with warm conversation and laughter. These gatherings had become monthly traditions, allowing the Foundation's extended family to share updates, challenges, and celebrations in an intimate setting. Thomas Wells, the former chauffeur whose testimony had helped expose the truth, sat with Victoria, their past actions acknowledged but forgiven. Helena remained under house arrest, but her detailed records had proved invaluable in helping other families reconnect and understand their histories. Sarah moved through the room, touching base with each guest. There was Dr. Chen, whose genetic insight into neural plasticity was revolutionizing trauma treatment. Besides her sat Professor Williams, whose environmental research was helping communities adapt to climate change. Each person wore their silver ring proudly, now upgraded with technology that connected rather than controlled. As everyone settled around the table, Sarah stood to offer a toast. The setting sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the gathered faces, all part of an extraordinary journey that had begun with a chance encounter in St. James's Park. "A wise person once told me that our genetics are just the beginning of our story," she began, looking at Margaret. "It's our choices, our connections, and our compassion that truly define us. This past year and a half has proven that truth in ways we never imagined." She gestured to the roses arranged along the table. "These flowers have become our symbol, not just of our shared past, but of our commitment to growth and renewal. Like them, we flourish not through control, but through nurturing and freedom." Alexander raised his glass. "To family, both born and chosen. To ethical progress," Emma added. "To strength in unity," James contributed. "To the future," Margaret concluded softly. As the guests clinked glasses, Sarah touched her ring, now a symbol of belonging rather than bondage. The genetic program had intended to create controlled excellence, but had instead sparked a revolution in how humanity approached its potential through choice, compassion, and collaboration. Later that evening, Sarah stood in the rose garden, watching the stars emerge. Alexander joined her, wrapping a warm jacket around her shoulders. "Sometimes I still can't believe how everything has changed," she said quietly. "From that day in the park when I thought I'd lost everything, to now." "Life has a way of coming full circle," Alexander replied. "Catherine's research was meant to help humanity face its challenges. In the end, it has, just not in the way anyone expected. Sarah smiled, touching a late-blooming rose. Its petals were soft against her fingers, a reminder of the delicate balance between strength and gentleness, between potential and choice. Inside, the dinner party continued, voices and laughter spilling out into the garden. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, new opportunities to shape the future. But tonight was for celebration, of family found, of purposes discovered, of gifts freely shared. The mystery that had begun with a silver ring had blossomed into something far more precious, a legacy of hope built on the understanding that humanity's greatest achievements come not from control, but from the freedom to choose how to use our gifts for the greater good.